Hey, what's going on everybody? Today we're going to go over the Model 80 synthesizer, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to explain the synthesizer as quickly as I can and all its parts and how to use it for sound design. And my assumption in explaining it is you're already familiar with synthesis and you're familiar with how PWM works, what are waveforms, filters, sync, filter FM, oscillator FM, etc. What we're going to do is go through and explain how to use this synthesizer in particular. Now, please forgive my audio quality. The situation is that this particular synthesizer takes up such a large amount of CPU that I have to actually record my voice through my phone separately, or else it gives me all kinds of pops and cracks. So bear with the audio quality of the voice here. Thank you very much for that. And I just wanted to throw in a quick plug. Link down below in the description. I got 90 presets for the Model 80 for synthwave, cinematic, etc., retro styles. They're the highest quality presets for the Model 80 on the market. You get 90 presets. Everything is totally original. Check it out. Link is down in the description. Thanks for hearing me out on that. Now let's get back to the video. I'm going to just go through each part and explain exactly how it works in this particular synth. This programmer right here is basically just a preset selector. So when you press 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you get different presets. They're like that. You cycle through the banks and you select the numbers. You get different presets. Now what we're going to do for our purposes is go to initialize. This gives us a clean patch. This sawtooth, and you'll notice it's kind of stuck on the settings of the prior patch, so when I click something, kind of jumps and then boom, it goes clean. Alright, one thing I'll tell you right away is when you have an initialized patch, you're going to notice that the waveforms are a little bit dull sounding. That's because the filter cutoff at max is not actually at max. If you want to bring it to max, you have to put in a little bit of envelope. You can hear right there. That's about fully open. So right away you should know that is important. So I'm going to go through this step by step. First we have the oscillators. The way that this works is we have oscillator 1, oscillator 2. These have coarse tuning controls. That's C1, C1. So these are octave tunings. Goes up to C4. Same here. All right. And then this knob right here is the fine tuning for oscillator 2. So this is if you want to detune. So if you want to have them both running, here's the mixer. You get oscillator 1, oscillator 2 level, and a noise level. All right, so bring in oscillator 1, oscillator 2. Now you have to have a waveform selected or you're not going to hear anything, and that's important to know. So let's select a sawtooth wave and a sawtooth wave. Now you hear them both. Fine tune. Or we have our coarse tuning. Right? All right, and as you can hear, this is our mixer, so this is our volumes for our oscillators. And we have a noise generator here. The noise generator has no settings other than the volume of the noise, which is just brought in right here. Now, the way that this oscillator works and the Prophet oscillators work is that you'll hear that there's actually a combination of multiple shapes into one waveform. So as you can see here, it's got a square and a saw. For example, the way that this works is that when you add them together, you're not actually getting two separate oscillators. You're getting one oscillator and you're kind of getting a combination shape. Like if you took these two shapes and stuck them on top of each other, that's your new shape for the oscillator. But you still only always have one oscillator. Same here, three shapes. And this is just basically when you combine them, you change the shape into an intermediate shape between two or three of them. They're not three oscillators. Okay, it's always one, and it's just changing the shape. So like here, this is saw, square, combined. All right, and keep in mind when you select both of them, they get a little bit louder, so you might have to turn it down in the mixer. Now what's interesting about this is here you have the pulse width, and there's your obvious PWM. But what's interesting about it is when you add the second shape, then you get like a blend of PWM and the stability of the saw. So this is like creates a unique shape for the Prophet synthesizers. So again, same here. We'll go to this oscillator. Here we got a square plus triangle. You can barely hear that. And then triangle plus saw. Now, one thing that's cool about this, why we have a triangle plus saw here, is this is a really good one to use for your bass. Like if you have a lower oscillator, or you just want to create kind of a more bassy tone, or like, you know, the oscillator on the lower octave, like if this one is up higher, for example, this is a good one to use for any kind of bassy tones, because this triangle just adds a low harmonic. So like without it, we have a low saw. You add the triangle, you can hear it, like you just get like a bassier sawtooth wave. So I'm going to take it an octave down. Right, same with the square. So that's how that works. And again, we have this interesting kind of combination situation with the pulse width, and you can hear the triangle mixed in there. So that's how that works. This is your oscillator sync. All right, when you do the sync, basically what you want to do is, if you just want to hear the synced oscillator, again, make sure always waveforms are selected or you hear nothing, is you put the top oscillator, pitch always has to be above the lower oscillator, then you get the sync sound, and you can hear it sweeping. Basically pretty straightforward. Same with the pulse, or any combination. Right? That's the sync. And then I'll show you how to do that with the LFO or the envelope or whatever later. All right. Same with controlling the pulse width. So that goes over the oscillators. Right here, this is keyboard tracking on or off. So when you turn the keyboard tracking is normally on, it's just a regular oscillator. Oh, I didn't hear anything because it wasn't on. If you turn the keyboard tracking off, you get a flat pitch oscillator that plays within a notice blade, but the pitch is only selected here. And the reason for that usefulness is when you're using it for modulation, like frequency modulation, you turn off keyboard tracking. And also if you're using it right here, this low frequency turns it into an LFO, which actually brings it below the audible range. Okay, so that basically just turns it below audible range into an LFO that you can later use to modulate like pulse width or whatever, pitch, anything like that. And then again, you can have a key tracked LFO that's below audio range, or you can have just a regular non-key tracked LFO like that. All right, so we went over the oscillators, we went over the mixer. Filter is very straightforward. We got our sawtooth running here. It's just a resonant low-pass filter. So there's our cutoff, resonance. This is envelope amount. Okay, this just adds a positive envelope amount to whatever this envelope ADSR shape is. Right? And keep in mind, you can hear how it actually goes above the cutoff. So again, because the cutoff doesn't actually hit the top, right? And this is our amp envelope here. So basically there's our two envelopes. Now, when it comes to the filter right here, this is keyboard tracking on or off. So it's full keyboard tracking. It's not, there's no keyboard tracking amount. It's just either on or off. So if we bring the filter to self-resonating, which we can do, then we can play the filter. And this can be useful for all kinds of effects, frequency modulation, put some noise through there. Right? So on and so forth. And if we turn that off, you get a flat filter. Those are the two options for the filter keyboard tracking. Right over here to the LFO. All right. This LFO is always tied in with the mod wheel. This is the standard LFO, and the mod wheel always represents the strength of the LFO to one of these destinations. So like this is your LFO speed, LFO frequency. This is the LFO shape, and these are the LFO destinations. So the LFO is never selected over here anywhere. It's always selected right here, exactly where it goes. So for example, right now it goes to frequency 1, which is the pitch of oscillator 1. Frequency 2 is the pitch of oscillator 2. PW1 is pulse width oscillator 1. PW2, pulse width oscillator 2, and filter. And you can select multiple destinations at once, or none. If you have none of them selected, you're not going to get any effect. Alright, so let's go to frequency 1 real quick, and if I play the note, well, let's take off this resonating filter, bring in oscillator 1. You see, you're not hearing anything. The reason for that is because the strength of this LFO is always controlled by the mod wheel. Now this gives you a little bit of an interesting situation where if you want an LFO running all the time through your patch, like let's say you have some kind of like LFO filter effect, and you want that all the time when you're playing, the way to do that, you can either give up the second oscillator as an LFO and not use the second oscillator, and then keep this as a performance tool like your mod wheel. So that's one option, but the regular option is to set your mod wheel where you want it for strength and to leave it there. And then when you go to save the patch, your mod wheel is going to get saved where it is. So if you load the patch, don't touch the mod wheel. Like in my preset bank that I created, I actually labeled mod for the ones where I want to touch the mod wheel and no mod for the ones where it's set. Because you're kind of in this situation, like if you want patches with a running LFO and using 2 oscillators, you have to give up your mod wheel parameter as a performance control, and you have to just set it where you want it, you know, if you want that constant effect, and then save it with the patch. So that's how that works. So as you can hear now, I brought in a certain strength of this LFO to the filter. This is our frequency. And these shapes work exactly the same way as this oscillator shapes. It's always one LFO and you're just combining the shape. So like here you can get like an edgy triangle. Let's hear it like with the... So you always get one LFO and it just kind of combines the shapes geometrically. And again, you can put these to multiple destinations, like if I wanted something like this. Like that, I'm moving the mod wheel. So this LFO is always tied to the mod wheel. The last 2 options here is that DAW sync. When you click this gets set to a certain tempo of your DAW, so like 16th notes, so you can get tempo synced LFO effects, right? So that's now synced to 8th notes. And then the last option here is if you bring this to noise, you get just like a noise modulation, like a white noise modulation. This can just be creative with it because you can blend it between the LFO shape and the noise, and you can kind of create like some interesting effects that are kind of grungy. Alright, so just play around with that, and you know, bringing it up a little bit can also be kind of useful if you want to control your max LFO depth. Like with a performance, you don't want it so strong. You can kind of bring in a bit of noise. Then when you bring in the LFO, it doesn't sound as strong, but you do get a bit of a noise effect. So it's kind of, but that's how it works. Okay, so that's the LFO. Now here, we're going to go into the voice mod. This is where we use either oscillator 2 or we use the filter envelope to control one of these parameters. Frequency 1 is the pitch of oscillator 1, pulse width of oscillator 1, or the filter. If we use the low frequency mode on oscillator 2 without any keyboard tracking, this basically turns it into an LFO like this. But again, we give up the second oscillator. But now we can use the same effect, and let's say put it on frequency 1 in the filter. And you bring in, this is the amount. This is just like the mod wheel, this is the strength. We get that same exact effect that we had with the LFO, but we lost oscillator 2. Now this is interesting here because you can keyboard track your LFO. Right? So this is gives you another effect for the LFO. And if you turn off low frequency, this becomes an audio rate modulation. So now this is like FM to whatever parameter you want. So like if you want to modulate frequency 1 with the audio rate oscillator 2, then this is a strength. So like we go here, you can hear it a little better if we make this into like a strong wave, like a square. And this is also where it's useful to have no keyboard tracking or keyboard tracking, depending on what kind of tone you want. Right? If you turn off keyboard tracking, but you don't have that low frequency on, you get audio rate non-keyboard tracked modulation oscillator. Just like that. Or you can take it to the pulse width, and this only has an effect if you select pulse, or pulse together with saw, but you have to have a pulse. And again, this is the depth, or to the filter. Right, so that's the filter FM with oscillator 2. That's how that works. Okay, and then lastly here we have the filter envelope. This just uses a filter envelope to control these same parameters. And this is your filter envelope, obviously. So let's say if we have like a regular decay envelope, this is where it's useful like this. You go to frequency 1, and you go here, and you turn on your sync. Alright, that's how you get your oscillator sync sweeps and things like that. This just controls the strength of that filter envelope to any of these parameters. You can do it to pulse width, filter, etc. Alright, and now I'm going to go into the side panel. There's one thing right here. This is called invert voice mod. And so you might think, okay, why would we want to have a filter envelope here go to the filter? Well, if you select invert voice mod, what this does is it gives you an inverted envelope. So like here, this is only a positive strength, like, right? So go here. Positive strength. But since we have our filter envelope inverted there, this becomes a, if you take this to the filter, for example, it becomes an inverted envelope strength. See, so you get an inverted envelope, and you can use the same thing like with your frequency, like oscillator 1 or something. Right? That's inverted filter. Okay, there's your voice mod. We went over all that. Glide, right here, this is polyphonic glide. And what this means is basically like the Prophet has 5 voices. You can see how each time you play a note, it hits one of the 5 voices randomly. Polyphonic glide just means the glide is always within one voice. So like when you go here, right, you go here, The next note I play, if it's higher, since it's playing another note, like you won't typically hear the glide unless you basically played a higher note on that voice before, so it's per voice glide. It's not a direct, you get kind of an unstable sort of Portamento effect that's a little different per key because it's based on whatever was the last key hit on that voice and not the last key you generally played. But it's still a good effect to use polyphonic because you can get like kind of little sliding effects between your notes, and it can be interesting, or you can use it for chords. Put a long one. Like that. Polyphonic glide. Here, if you turn on the Unison, basically what this does is this turns the synth into mono. So now you get regular glide because you're only using basically one voice or all 5 voices as one at the same time. So you can see it here, right? So I'm only using one. This is a stack. So this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of how many stacks we want per key. So like now I only use 1. If I turn stack 2, and then 4, right? 5. So that's how that works, and now you get like a monophonic mode with how many stacks you want. One thing you have to be careful with here is that when you're using the Unison, this synth has low note priority, which means if you're playing a higher note and you hold it and you hit the lower note, you'll hear it. But if you're holding the lower note and you hit a higher note, you won't hear anything. Because the low note always plays like over the high note, but the high note doesn't play over the low note. So you have to release the low note first to play that higher note. And that's just something to be aware of. It's just an emulation of how the old hardware worked. And again, the stacks here, you bring in, let's say 3. This is your detune. So like you're detuning and you get that fat Unison effect. All right. That's how that works. Master tune is just a regular tuning knob for the synth. This A440 is just like a tuning fork. I usually prefer to use like a tuning plugin, but you can tune by ear. And then that just plays a stable tone. Now release here, this is just part of the envelope, and all this does is disable any kind of release on your sound if you want that for whatever reason, like you're playing a sound with release. You know, maybe you want to just turn off that release. You can automate it or play around with that for whatever reason. And aging is just controls like the randomness of different parameters in here per voice and oscillator drift and things like that. So it gives an effect of an older synth where things are kind of more chaotic. So that just it's not really a strongly obvious effect. It's just something to play around with if you want a more drifty, older kind of synth sound versus something a little more tight and consistent. It's lower aging, higher aging is less consistent. So keep that in mind. And then your volume, basic volume right there. This is a Quantize Cutoff, just gives you like a stepped kind of cutoff sound, like in some digital synthesizers. If you're sweeping the cutoff, you get a more stepped sound. So that's just a little tool to play around with. This is velocity to amp. So velocity to amp is just how hard you hit the key. Controls the amplitude. And the more you bring this up, the more of an effect it has, like really low or higher. Or you can do it a little bit. Same with the filter here. If you bring down the filter, right, you can hear that. And it's the same thing with Aftertouch, basically just controls how much. Pan spread, this takes these 5 voices and spreads them out across the stereo field. So like right now, they're all down the middle. Then you turn up the pan spread, right? So you can kind of play it with how much pan spread you want. It's just a cool effect. really good for like keyboard sounds and things like that. You get some stereo effect. Also works with your Unison. You turn on Unison and pan spread, and you put a stack, and you get a more panned out sound. Like that. Alright. Pitch bend range. That just controls when you turn your pitch bend, like how far it goes. This is 2 semitones up to 12. So just 12, for example, versus 2. Or anywhere in between. So that covers this whole entire synthesizer and how it works. I hope that's been very helpful. Please leave a like and subscribe if you liked the video, if you'd like to see more content like this. And again, please check out the patches for the synthesizer in the link in the description down below, as well as many others such as Diva, Obsession, Behringer K2, Model 82, Softube, etc. That's all on that website as well on the homepage. And again, have a wonderful day. Thank you very much.